Hey guys, it's Jen. Thanks for joining us for another Pride and Grit Spouse Spotlight. I am very excited today because we're taking a little bit of a different twist and we're going to get to talk about some things we don't always talk about. We often will talk about entrepreneurs and their journeys, and I love doing that. But this is going to be an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about advocacy and a little bit about our volunteers and a little bit about how those two things fit so well together. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Sarah Streyder. And Sarah, I'm going to give you a minute to just kind of introduce yourself to everyone who's watching and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am born and raised in California. When I was 14, I met a cute boy who eventually became my husband. We met at church, and 7 years after meeting each other, I popped the question and he said yes. We've been part of this military family now for 4 years, so we're still, I guess, on the younger end of it comparatively. But in those 4 years, like many military spouses, I've had 9 jobs. I've had to be very adaptive to different geographies and different opportunities in order to stay busy and fulfilled in my own life. So I can relate to, I think, what's the case for a lot of your listeners. And then I did the math before this and I realized Jason and I have spent 55% of our marriage living apart from each other based on one or both of our careers taking us in two different directions. So we are well familiar with the long distance relationship blues and, of course, tips that come
Yeah,
along.
no, absolutely. It's funny. I think maybe not all military spouses, but I think a lot of military spouses, they know those points in time where they crossed over into being like for us, it was, I forget when it was a few years ago, but it was like, oh, we're just now at the point where we've spent more time together than we've spent apart. And it took a really long time. I think it was like 9 years or something obscene to like get to that point where you realize you've spent more time together than not. So it's funny. It's a
Right.
weird mark on the wall that somehow we all know. makes us
Yep. I
makes
think
our
we're going to hit that mark right before he deploys next.
Of
So,
course, just in time to turn the balance upside down. Yes, understood.
exactly.
So in your kind of short time, one of the questions I always like to ask is, from your experience and the folks that you've talked to, what are some of the things that you see as the biggest challenges for military spouses? And I think particularly, I often have folks who've been around a long time, but having someone who is a little bit sort of newer, if you will, into the military life. I'd love to hear your perspective on what your peers are really challenged with the most right now, and also what they're finding as the thing they enjoy most about the life. So I kind of try to hit on both of those.
Right, right. Uh, so I can start with the hardest maybe so that we can end on a happier note.
Perfect.
The way I'd sum up the hardest challenges have to do with our identity. So when you are a military spouse, by nature, you are being defined by the person you're married to and their occupation, which seem pretty incidental to the core of you as an individual.
Right.
And so I think there's like a personal existential level where it feels really hard to be like, who am I? What am I
Mm-hmm.
supposed to do? How do I set boundaries between, this is me and my life and my priorities, and this is my marriage, my partnership. Even if you're not married, this goes for partners as well. But of course, that has, tangible implications too. What does it mean for my job life, for my work life, for what I want to get out of life? I know not everyone wants to have a job outside the home, so it may be volunteering, it might be hobbies, but defining that and giving yourself the opportunity to get into those while being thrown every which way, I think that's the hardest
Mm-hmm.
balance to find. But of course, the upside is the fact that we're not alone. And I think and this is the case for most people I listen to, the most rewarding part of being part of the military family is the community,
Mm-hmm.
is making connections with friends that are deeper than any other friendships you might have had, even going so far as to be chosen family, I know is a term a
Yeah.
lot of folks
Yeah.
use.
Absolutely.
And I've just been so grateful that I found those relationships and I've learned a lot from them because our military is diverse as the communities we come from.
Mm-hmm.
And it means a lot to get to learn from my friends who have very different life experiences based on either where they grew up or what their parents believed and taught them. And we get to kind of give that exchange, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think on some level, I think I would say I tend to take that a little bit for granted that that's just a thing everyone has. But you're absolutely right. if you're someone who grows up in an area and stays in an area, your influences tend to be those people, in that particular area. And, we all, not all of us, but I think a lot of us have friends that have lived, they've lived abroad, or they've lived in, 7, 8, 9, 10 different parts of the world. And to be able to bring all those experiences together and see what traditions they, acquire, and just there's such a richness, I think, to our friendships, because it does have all that influence, and all the different things that we've all seen. So I love that. And I think, the identity piece, I think, comes up again and again and again. And what I find interesting sometimes is that it seems like we sort of ebb and flow through that, right? Like, not everybody hits that point at the same time in their military service journey where they feel like they don't have that identity, or they feel like they're missing that. For some people, it doesn't happen until later, until you're almost retiring. And then, you're like, okay, now what? Now what does my life look like? And for others, I think it's, if you started off with a career and then you got married, which was my situation, very quickly you're like, wait a minute, where's all the stuff I had built? Where's the identity I had built before this was
Right.
a reality? So it is also interesting to see how everybody comes at that from a different place, and kind of, there's peaks and valleys along the way. You might think you have it figured out, and then you're like, oh no, I don't, and at least, I don't know, for me, it's very
Yeah.
much a journey that goes up and down.
Yes, yes. Oh, same for me. I remember when Jason first signed on the dotted line, I was like, okay, cool. But that was just still so much on the side of my main life,
Right.
which I was so focused on at the time, which was graduating college and getting my first internship and all of those things. And it took a few years before I really decided, you know what, instead of treating these things like separate and even at odds, I think there's some benefit to looking at the combined power. And
Mm-hmm.
so this project that I launched is really the best, I guess, personification of that so far in my life, where I've kind of leaned into my military spouse identity and looked for opportunities to bring back the skills that I learned outside the community into the community. So yeah, that was certainly my journey. And I'm sure there'll be a point where I'll take a break and go back, just like you said.
Sure.
But for now, it's good.
Yeah, so continue talking through that a little bit about what you're up to now, and how that kind of plays into some of the stuff I was talking about in the lead in terms of advocacy and volunteerism, and kind of, help us understand what it is you're up to with Secure Families.
Yeah, totally. So a little bit about what we're about. So the Secure Families Initiative is a brand new initiative we just launched in January, that is currently being nested within an existing organization, but we'll see if we're able to spin off as our own nonprofit in the future. I think that'd be great. But yeah, the program is, we want to encourage military spouses and family members to get more involved in voting and advocacy on behalf of their community, whatever that might look like. Now, specifically, we like to focus on issues of foreign policy, because, of course, our lives are directly impacted by these very high-level decisions that shape how our country interacts with the rest of the world. So we have an active stake in making sure those decisions are deliberative and have the most positive outcomes as possible. So we want to insert the military family perspective in those decisions as early as possible. But more broadly, I mean, we help coach folks through the voter registration process, because, of course, the first step to becoming an advocate is voting. That's like, foundation step number one. And it can be a little tricky when you're active duty, especially, and you're moving around. So we help coach you through that process. And then we do online webinar trainings that are free, and everything's nonpartisan. They are trainings on different topics related to being the best advocate you can be. Things like how to tell your story to a non-military audience, or what are the rules about being politically involved, and the boundaries that exist, either hard and fast rules or perception feeling rules that we all feel. We coach folks through that too. And we've got a whole slew of advocacy training. So if folks are interested in getting more involved on a topic that affects their family and their community, and they want to kind of sharpen their skills, I'd certainly recommend they give us a try.
So what would you say is the thing that holds, I guess, people back from, let's say someone is, we'll take a volunteer as an example, because I think volunteers just sort of have that, often have that sort of the spirit of wanting to give back, and wanting to help, and wanting to advocate for, the audience that they're trying to support as part of their volunteer work. But what is the thing that you feel like kind of holds people back from making a more deliberate transition into like a role where, like you're doing, where you're truly, day in and day out focusing 100% on advocacy work. What is that kind of keeps people from being willing to take that next step, whatever that next step might look like?
Other than the fact that none of us has enough time or
Right.
energy, of course.
Other than that, like, it's nothing.
No, there are two main, I guess, hesitations that we face when we encounter folks. So the first one being, I think a lot of people are intimidated by the term advocate, and they think that it requires you to be some sort of expert,
Oh,
that you have to know all the answers and be super well informed in order to have an opinion or tell someone that opinion. And I get that. I mean, it's really intimidating entering into a conversation with a stranger or even a friend or family member and thinking, uh-oh, I hope they don't ask me something I
I
don't know
don't
how to
know, right?
respond. But of course, especially when it comes to talking about the military family lifestyle, you are a subject matter expert just by being a family member. I
True.
mean, you have access to this experience that anyone outside the experience doesn't. And I think people underestimate how much value and power comes by being human. When someone
Mm-hmm.
asks me a question, let's say I'm in a meeting with a politician and they ask me a question and I don't know the answer at the top of my head, my ability to say, I don't know, but let me get back to you is actually really powerful
Sure.
because I'm then seen as, human. I've gone through the same learning process as everyone else. And it makes me seem honest as well, which is,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the case. So that's kind of obstacle number one. I think the biggest one, especially for military spouses and family members, is this perspective that I'm not supposed to,
Mm.
that anything that gets anywhere close to something political is dangerous either for me or for my spouse's career. And, I of course get that. And of course, if you're, say, a command spouse, if you're a very visible spouse, I think your obligations are different from if you're an E5 spouse like me, where people do not care. But what we like to say is we like to reframe how we think of the word advocacy. At its core, advocacy is storytelling. You are
Mm.
sharing your experience, how you are sharing facts about how decisions have affected you and your family. And that is important for decision makers to understand the impacts in ways that they might not otherwise. We like to joke that, the military loves its briefings. Everything you may or may not want to do, you got to go to a briefing first. Because the military values having the most accurate information and full of information at their disposal. Well, sharing our stories is a part of that puzzle. And so we see telling your story and being an advocate is actually the most patriotic thing you can do as a family member in supporting your service member.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I'm thinking through, you know, for myself and for my peers because again, I've been around a little bit longer, and I can see where that comes from. Do you think some of that is sort of cultural in that? And what I mean by that is that the the military of 10 or 15 years ago and the expectations that existed within have those started to evolve in a way that have given room for advocacy and given room for it to be not only accepted but in some situations desired for spouses like ourselves to be able to tell the stories that allow leaders to have more informed information and more informed decisions. I mean, I'm thinking a lot of the things I've heard and seen in relation to some of the housing issues, and I think there's definitely some military spouses in those realms that would say it didn't work out so well for them. That they did have issues by speaking out. So how do people kind of know where and how and when sort of to do it and when not? I don't know. Have you guys kind of talked through that, and what would be your response to those that are still hesitant based on some of those recent experiences that weren't so great. But that said, I will say there were a lot of, I think, also efforts. A lot of the times in places where I was seeing those mentioned, there were a lot of people that were quick to say, "Hey, like we want to know where there are issues and where you feel like your voice is being stifled because we want to address those because culturally that's not where we want to go. That's not who we want to be." So I'm curious, kind of what you've seen as that evolution over the last few years.
Totally. And I totally agree that things have changed over time and that I have so much admiration and gratitude for the spouses and family members who paved the way before.
Absolutely,
I know because the
because it
battles
was
they fought
hard.
were so much harder. Yeah, and I think one great example. So Joyce Razor, formerly the ED of NMFA, recently retired. She's an advisory board member of ours. She's a great example of someone who has been such a steadfast fighter in this space for so long. And 25 years ago, they were just starting to talk about this thing called the widow's tax and how maybe it should be repealed. And here we go, this last NDAA. Finally, decades later, the fruit of her and many others' labor finally came to pass. And she's just been such an incredible mentor and encourager by saying, yes, it's hard at times, but it's gotten much easier because we've set the precedent over time that it's okay and in fact encourage for more spouses to be more active participants. So I am inspired by her and by others. Obviously, there are still situations where it is not smiled upon by every individual when you decide to chime in and say, hey, maybe things could be improved. But I think there are a couple ways to mitigate that. I mean, first of all, tone goes a long way.
Sure.
So it shouldn't have to be said, but any of us who are advocating for change do so because we love the military as an organization. We have to have made all of the personal sacrifices that we have to be a part of it.
Right.
And so the source of our advocacy comes ultimately from a source of love, that we want this organization to be the best that it can be so that future generations continue to serve. And I think conveying that tone goes a long way toward establishing a sense of commonality and goodwill. So I think that there are ways to be advocates that are better and more effective. But another piece of it is, it's one thing to be an individual out there going out on a limb and saying something radical. And it's another when you get to join in numbers. Numbers are powerful. And so when you find a group that you can stand with, it's way easier and way more effective and way less likely that you yourself will feel whatever the repercussions are. So that's one of the main purposes of creating SFI, is when you have this title, this shield, and this group that kind of stands with you, the idea being you'll have a lot more solidarity to go about things. And so I think that's really important. And I've really been inspired by a lot of the other military spouses that have started similar group efforts around common issues, whether it's housing, like you mentioned, or EFMP issues, that kind of thing. I think that goes a long way.
No, it is, it's really been impressive to watch, and in some ways unfortunate to watch, right? Because it's unfortunate that it's sort of taken so long, but really just inspiring.
Or been necessary in the first place.
Right. Well, yeah, right. There's absolutely that. But I remember writing a piece, it might have been like a year ago now, but it was during when those initial hearings were happening around housing, and because it almost like watching everybody talking about what they'd been through, brought me to tears. One, because they had to do it, but two, because they were willing to, and they were willing, to your point, be the people out in front, taking the risk and figuring out, how do they do this, and just deciding to kind of go in feet first, and listening to some of those hearings. And it was really just inspiring from an advocacy standpoint to understand that sometimes, to your point, it's a story, it's your story. And that's where all the power comes from, because no one can dispute, to a large extent, right? No one can dispute your experience. They may or may not agree with how you frame it. But at the end of the day, your experience is your experience. It's like that old thing, like nobody gets to tell you how to feel. Like it's kind of the same, right? Nobody gets to tell you what your experience was like. And as you share it, it does. There's power to it as others start to have very similar stories and very similar, ideas about how to make a situation better. So now it's been kind of, I hate to say cool, because it's again, unfortunate that it's necessary, but I love where we're heading, in the sense that there are organizations that are really trying to help create those advocacy opportunities to really bring those honest conversations, and elevate them, so that they really do start to inform decisions that they need to inform. So no, that's, yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit in terms of like the work that you guys are doing, as you said, is focused more on voting. And so I'm curious in sort of this particular climate, right, where we're, where things are a little bit unique, and, we're not really sure about summer moves and how some of those are going to look, and where we're going to be, come November. Are there any steps you would advocate folks do now, or things that people should be thinking about in terms of, I don't know, just the November timeframe, and I don't know, just I was thinking about that and how that's impacted right now. So speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, my content manager, Kate, shout out to Kate, who she's in charge. She's taking it upon herself to track all of the deadlines that every state has for registration and turning in your ballot through both the primary and the general. And yeah, her life has become a bit of a mess having to keep track of all the changes.
Yeah.
But the best thing you can do, honestly, right now is make sure that you're following someone like us or someone like FFAP or other organizations that are sending out information as it develops. Because if there is a chance that you will be moving this summer, it means that you're going to have a new address where your ballot gets sent, assuming you're, an absentee ballot, an absentee voter voting back home, wherever that is. You can't yet register because you don't know where to tell them to send your ballot. So unfortunately, there's not much prep you can do other than, I don't know, maybe printing out the form and getting it ready to go. So for now, the best thing is, follow SFI, follow other sources of information so that when the time comes and it's like, okay, the deadline's next week, you got to prep the form, you can do it with whatever information you've got at hand. And hopefully we are all back to normal movements. Our deployed members have come home. Our families have moved out of hotels. That's certainly what we're aiming for, and we can vote.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about the fact that a lot of the deadlines may shift as just staff has changed and processing times, perhaps are longer and things like that. So that's all good to just be thinking about as we kind of come out of this fog.
Yeah.
Something else I was just thinking about, and of course it's now gone. But I was curious from since you're in the DC area and you see a lot, if folks are interested in, if I am someone who, feels like I have the passion, if you will, to be an advocate for military families, and I would like to help add my voice, but I don't really know where to align, how to align, what would you recommend someone do that's in that kind of situation who'd like to add their voice to what's out there?
Yeah. I mean, you can always contact your individual representatives at local, state, and federal level and tell your story and share your 2 cents at any time. And offices, especially congressional offices, especially value input from their constituents, much more so than even groups like my own sometimes. So you can always make your voice heard, whatever it is you care about, and however it looks for you. Of course, if you find organizations that mobilize and advocate on issues that you agree with, whether it's things like foreign policy, whether it's the environment, you name it. If you find at least an issue area that you can agree with, often finding a group that advocates for it and joining whatever efforts they're doing can help as well. So like at SFI, we will sign petitions when we think that it's important, or we've got letter campaigns that we'll do to elevate a particular issue within our area. And those are things that volunteers can do wherever they're at. You don't have to be in DC. Right. You don't have to show up to Capitol Hill. You can shoot off an email or sign a petition online. So that's the great thing about that.
Yeah. No, and I hadn't thought about it because we've just somehow magically never ended up in DC. I'm sure someday it'll happen. But I had never thought about how, and I'm asking this just because I literally don't know, how easy is it to kind of volunteer with those organizations? Like, as you said, if there's a particular topic that you're really passionate about, to be able to become part of that organization from an advocacy standpoint, like how easy is that? Is it sort of just literally you show up and there's an interest? Or, I guess it's like volunteering anywhere else, right? There's no one ever turns down a volunteer, and no one ever turns down someone who wants to be a part of that. I guess does that hold true, I guess, in DC?
Definitely. And you get you get to do as much or as little as you want when you're a volunteer because you set the rules.
Right.
So it could be as simple as signing a petition and you feel good. It could be more involved. I know we provide a lot of content around either keeping up with the news and how it relates to military families. We also have some advocacy blog posts that we'll post that give other examples of things you can do, like writing a letter to the editor or getting an op-ed placed in a paper about an issue you care about. That's another really big way of shaping the conversation in a valuable way. And I would just say, too, there are obviously, this year's a big election year, and so there are always going to be campaigns looking for volunteers as well. So if you're more interested in, say, a local individual
right.
running for your school board or a state senator. I managed the campaign for a state senator when I was in Nebraska during the midterms. And I was the campaign manager. So it goes to show military spouses can get politically involved. So sometimes it's a person you care a lot about, and they'll have a lot of opportunities, whether it's writing postcards from home or knocking doors on your neighbors once it's socially appropriate to knock doors again.
Sure.
And of course, we're going to try to provide a lot of those volunteer opportunities as well that are specifically catered to military family lifestyle, because that's what we know most personally, and is something that not every campaign thinks about.
Yeah, I was listening to I guess it was like a virtual conference yesterday, and I wish I could remember who the speaker was because I would love to give them credit, but I don't remember who it was. But they were talking about the fact that oh, I know what it was. It was a Bayside chat that Kelly Artist was doing with Bianca about Jacksonville, and what one of the things she said that I thought was really interesting, and from an advocacy standpoint, I think plays in very much, is she was talking about how in her local area, I think it was her, but that she used to attend like the city council meetings, and she used to attend these different things that were going on in her community as a way to connect to the community, and it was just something, honestly, it hadn't occurred to me. And maybe some of that is if you didn't have family members who've done that in the past, or that's just not kind of a thing you were raised around, maybe that's part of it. But I think it's also a transient mentality, right? So in my mind, I'd never thought to attend things like that, because by the time anything I am engaged in is implemented, I'm likely to be gone. And I think that's the challenge with military life, is sometimes the impact of your efforts are not maybe going to be things you get to take advantage of and get to feel, but it is really, advocacy ultimately is really about making it better for sort of the next, if you will. And maybe it's not you,
right,
but really being committed to what's going to come next and being willing to put in that time and effort. And so I thought that was really good advice, that if you want to be connected to your community, then get connected. And that means you have to be informed. That's how you know what's going on. That's how you insert, to your point, your story and your military experience into decisions that are happening in your local community. But it never occurred to me. So I love that.
Sure.
I just love that advice. It's simple, right? And it's not DC. It's just a way to stay connected locally, which is easy. And you never know. To her point, like, you could end up there a really long time. Some bases are hard to leave. And so maybe you do get to see the fruit of that labor, at some point. And regardless, there's still value in it anyway. So
Totally. Even if it's not on, you don't have to even be passionate about a specific issue. Even showing that you're engaged itself carries a lot of weight. I remember when I was in Nebraska and there was a town hall event for our member of Congress down the road. I showed up and I was the youngest person there by probably 20 years because it was in the middle of the day. So students or people who work outside the home were, of course, not able to attend.
Right.
And just I raised my hand and I asked a question, and I introduced myself as the spouse of someone working at Offutt Air Force Base just down the road. And I tell you, the amount of reception I got from attendees as well as the member of Congress just appreciating me being there was huge. And I think it left its own impact beyond just by demonstrating that we care about these things and we're paying attention. So it doesn't have to be specific or tangible. And like you said, you don't even have to see the fruits of your labor in terms of legislation getting passed or something, but just by being active in the space to the extent that you're able, I think has its value as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's good. Anything else you want us to know about kind of what you guys are up to, where they can find you, where they can find Secure Families Initiative? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Totally. You can find us on securefamiliesinitiative.org. We have, like I said, a lot of resources that are there all the time, whether it's about voting, whether it's about being an advocate. You can join one of our webinars, especially now that all of us are, glued to our computers and our Zoom calls. We're ready to step in and be an additional virtual community building resource for folks. And, follow us on social media as well. That's where we post a lot about our action items as they come, a lot about deadlines, like I said. And we're trying to be as supportive as possible. I was on CNN a couple weeks ago talking about the impact that I know, surreal. But talking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on military families, especially those with deployed loved ones. So we're trying to make sure that even under these very unique circumstances, that our community is well represented in the news. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad you hung out with us for a little while today. We appreciate it. It's great to meet you finally.
Same. Thanks for giving me an excuse to get a little dolled up.
I know, right? Like I took a shower today. Like, woohoo! I'm not in yoga pants. This is a win.
I'm talking to an adult that's not my husband. Woohoo!
I know, right? Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it. All right, guys. So that makes that's it for us for this spotlight. So keep tuning in and keep up with us. Follow Sarah, and we will post all the links to what she mentioned, where you can find her. We'll post that in the description. So check that out, and we will catch you guys on the next one. Have a great day.